And we're back.
10, 9, 8, double back.
7.
Do not be ashamed of your herpes.
4. Wait, you shouldn't be ashamed of
You
your
too
herpes?
can play soccer.
All right. So as you can tell, we didn't have any beer at the break. Nothing happened at all.
Absolutely not. Completely sober.
Can
I don't know what
is
you're
there a
talking
camera
about.
shot of the table right now? of what's coming?
No, but you guys can always lift it up to the cameras.
I don't know that we want to put that evidence out
Can
there.
lift the whole table up?
Evidence? I don't want to.
Evidence,
No.
yes.
Evidence.
Evidence.
I think Chris is already crossed the line.
No, sir. No, sir. How dare you?
I doubt your abilities to carry on. That's all I'm saying.
You will
apologize
soon see at the end of this.
for what's about to happen.
Yes.
Not that much though.
So.
Yeah, there'll be peace when you're done.
So, in this segment, Belgian Dark Strongs. Can you tell that we've started already?
Yes, we
Subby,
have.
here was our break beer. Here's one of them anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice.
Yum yums.
Really
That
excellent.
is
Very
beer.
much yum yums.
Really, really
Where's
tasty.
that St. Bernardus, that Potter's beer, the Potter
Sitting behind
Familius?
him.
Goddamn Potter Familius.
Yeah.
There we go.
No,
There we go.
There you go. Right
Dapper
there.
We
Dan.
talked about the Potter's beer
That.
on what when we did Belgian singles, right?
Right.
Yeah, which we had a hard
that
time
a dating
finding.
show?
That was really an
The
outstanding.
date rape show, what?
The date rape
Is
show.
that a dating show, the Belgian singles?
There you go. Yeah,
That Potter 6 was a
the
lot
date
better
rape
than
show
that
was the
triple.
Cosby show. Never mind.
Ouch.
Anyway.
And it begins.
Too soon.
And
huh?
the jello pudding. Would you like to have some pudding pops?
That was the worst Cosby imitation.
That
I've
was pretty
ever
bad.
heard.
I'm pretty sure you're
I'm on
right.
board.
Belgian quads, ladies and gentlemen.
So, did we have more that we wanted to talk about in terms of brewing? These
Hell yeah.
beers?
But of course we did.
Okay.
Now, how much of the step mash actually comes into for extracting more sugars to get a high gravity brew?
Extracting more sugars. It's not really about extracting more sugars as much as it is about making sure that the sugars that you do are as fermentable as possible. And so I would say really if you're talking about doing this on an extract basis, you can do that very easily and very well, but I would make sure that you add some corn sugar to it to dry it out and give yourself a more fermentable wort. I think with extract with this or a triple or any of these high-gravity Belgian beers, you need to put some sugar in there. And, you know, Belgian brewers put sugar in their beers all the time. So
Yeah, a
it's-
lot of these styles come with that
Yeah.
anyway. And even
From the newer all grain brewers?
I would say even for like, well, I mean, same concept there. A lot of times these come with the style needs to have it in there in order to kind of thin it out some. I would think too, like even if you were making a barley
Small
wine,
earthquake.
as far as high gravity brewing goes, I mean, it doesn't have to be specifically Belgian. If you were doing extract to tone that down, because that's like a,
What are you doing?
whether that be like a mash at like a, like 153 range probably, you know, that kind of thing. So why not go ahead and take some corn sugar in there to thin it out a little bit, just in case you're getting too much body out of that extract.
Okay.
I would say too, if you're a newer all grain brewer, that these high gravity beers like this are not a good way to start.
Absolutely.
I would make sure that you have some batches under your belt and you've got a feel for your system and you're able to hit temperatures well and that kind of thing before you get into anything high gravity, whether it's barley wines or big Belgians or imperial stouts or anything
Yeah,
like
or
that.
else you're going to have an alcohol bomb, and not like a
Yeah.
good alcohol bomb, a very hot and painful.
Or it's very likely that you're not going to hit your mash temperature correctly, and you know if you overshoot your mash temperature on a beer like this, you can ruin it from the very beginning.
Right.
You need to have a good feel for your system where you can hit your temperatures correctly and all that. And
We've definitely run
Who
into that
keeps
with our
hitting-
big brew system.
Are you hitting his, are you
no,
hitting
it's
his camera, dude?
Pete's doing it. Yeah.
No,
Okay,
no.
Okay.
He doesn't
Anyway.
have a camera.
Bad Pete. Very bad Pete. Asshole.
We can settle that.
You have to be
Activating
here
the
once in a
rail-shaped
while to get a
beacon.
camera. You know.
Oh, that's right. We never set up the Pete cam. That must be why he's revolting.
Probably. Well, I mean, he was revolting to begin with.
Yeah, he was.
Oh, the new guy lobs a fastball at you.
Asshole.
Lobs a fastball.
Bullshit.
That's not.
That's a chicken run reference.
Loser.
Slings a slow ball.
Yeah. All right.
You know, so you know, I really enjoy brewing these kind of styles, and I've
Yeah,
been
me
doing
too.
them for a long time, and some of the things that I can kind of give you my experience and some of the things that I do that I think really have improved my quality
You have like
of
a
these
nipple
particular
we can put
styles.
on this.
And you know, you guys have tasted some of the beers that I brew, and I really take a lot of pride in these beers, and they take time. They really do.
I think of the beers of yours that I've tasted, these are your sweet spot, really.
And I think the reason I do that, Brandon, I think is because I really do enjoy this style of beer, and it really does take some time. And so some of the things that I've learned to do over the years with this particular style, this is a particular style that I would say, you know, I'm a big dry yeast advocate. And I think this is one style that I particularly like to use liquid yeast on. And the reason being is because I am looking for a particular, I'm looking for a particular profile or a particular flavor or a particular ester that I'm looking for. And I think it's really important. Not to say that T58 is not a good yeast, but the problem I have with
I'll say T58 is not a good yeast.
Well,
It's more like a triple.
the problem with the T58 is that it's good God,
What
dude.
the hell are you doing, man?
I'm trying to get a cup.
You know this is a sound thing, right?
Sorry.
Let's go.
But
I'll take it out post
so
editing.
ultimately,
Sometimes I'm not very sound sensitive. Just give me a break.
the problem
Don't persecute me.
the problem with the T58 is that it doesn't eat maltotriose
Yeah,
or big multi-chain sugars. So
It's very tough to dry a beer out.
So
with
it's tough to,
T58.
yeah. So we've tried some beers. We tried to dry it out with the Abbey or the BE 256 and doing combinations with that. And I've just not had the results that I've had with the particular liquid strains that I've used in the past. If you're going to do that, I would highly suggest. I particularly like the Westmalle strain, which I believe is the Belgian strong ale from Yeast. I think it's the same strain. I really like that yeast. It's fantastic. And I mean, you got to brew. I mean, you got to build huge starters. And a lot of people think I'm crazy, but I'll pitch. On a 5-gallon batch, I'll take two smack packs, do a 5-liter starter, and then I come in and I hit it with O2 in the morning. When I pitch the yeast, and then 12 hours or 18 hours later, I'll actually hit it with oxygen again. Mm-hmm. And the reason being is I want to prolong the growth curve. I want to have even more alcohol. And so it really got me thinking, because one of the things that for example, James Lalonde started talking about mead, and he really got me to thinking about, can't do anything around here.
Right. Pete,
We had a discussion earlier. That
you haven't been
Pete
here
is
for a
backed
while.
up
We
with
actually
peatiness
talked
right
about
now.
beer now.
Oh, sorry.
But so anyhow, we started doing. I started thinking about it because he was talking about how mead, it doesn't have to take a year to mature, and a lot of it has to do with how you prepare your yeast,
the
right?
yeast
For your
health,
yeast.
right.
So it got to me thinking. I was like, oh, okay, so maybe you can apply that same logic to brewing high gravity beers, right? So if you prepare your yeast properly, you're not going to produce as much, high fusel alcohols that you would, and then it doesn't take as long for those to mellow out, right? So I do massive, huge starters, and then I hit it twice with O2. So as long as you hit it within less than 24 hours, you'll have a second. You'll prolong.
keep it in that growth phase.
You're in the growth
Yeah,
phase.
you
Still in
keep
the
it
growth phase. So
Yeah.
what that does is
Hell
you're
yeah.
able to have less fusel alcohols, and it also it ages.
Kind of kicks it in the ass at the same time.
One
and
thing
it will
one-
dry out too.
One thing I'll say is that when it comes to yeast selection, the one we're drinking here right now, the wood aged quad that I've got going around the table, that's that
I poured that out.
Fermentus Abbey yeast, which I think the Abbey yeast is really well suited for doubles and for quads.
For what?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Doubles and quads.
Doubles.
For
and quads.
doubles. Doubles and
Doubles
quads.
and quads.
For doubles and quads. That's so
and quads.
funny.
But I actually think
Somebody else say that.
that this quad has quite a bit of yeast character to it, a little bit more than you normally get out of the Abbey yeast for whatever reason. To be honest with you, I don't remember what I did on the fermentation.
It's too bad.
Yeah.
And I like I like to do I like to do just like I do the hefts. I like to do like I'll be at 60, 62 for 24 hours and then let it free rise.
Free rise.
Yeah,
And
I
you see
think
that'll recommended a lot as a nice free rise after the initial day or so, 2 days maybe.
Take
you know
it
what I mean?
easy.
Yeah, I mean I'll do 24 hour. I mean, but that's not to bring it in at 24. I mean, bring it in at, pitch it at 62 and then let it set at 62 for 24 hours.
Exactly.
And then just turn your keezer off or turn your fermentation deal off. Not stick it out in the hot garage or something.
Free rise up to maybe 70.
Well, yeah, and I mean you may not. Yeah, and I think that's what we set it at 72, and just let it free rise up to 72.
Let me ask you, Stubby, how do you free rise from there?
I just raise up the temperature controller to wherever it may be at like
Turn it
62.
off and let it go.
So when we
Let it
say
run.
free rise, the what that is the opposite of heating. So if you have a two-stage temperature controller, one stage is cooling and one stage is heating. So if you have, say, a 62 or 63 degree beer and then you set your temperature controller to 72, the heater will turn on and raise it to 72 degrees.
You gotta
No,
open
you
it.
don't wanna do that.
Instead,
No.
you shut off that heating section of it and you just set your temperature controller at
You let
73
the
or whatever.
heat of fermentation.
And the fermentation
Okay,
will
so-
naturally raise it up.
Once it normally hits that high threshold for cooling, you just turn it off from that point and let it naturally raise to
Yes,
the
correct.
whatever point it gets.
And-
And,
to.
in,
cut
and
off.
in August in
and I even-
Texas, that takes 10 minutes, right? You turn
Yeah,
it off.
yeah.
You're there.
Something I've noticed recently, yes.
Well, and what I do is I typically will just leave it in the keezer or the kegerator or the fermentation temperature, whatever I have it. I won't actually open the door or anything, which I do the exact opposite on a Hefeweizen. I'll actually open the door and let it warm up quick with a Hef. But with the Belgians, I kind of like to do that 62 or so and let it set and then let it free rise up, and I get pretty good results doing that.
You get a huge reduction in fusel alcohols with that as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
the
by
po-
starting it cool.
The whole point of that
I would
is
think
to
so.
let the yeast be comfortable in what they're doing. You're not stressing them out by changing the temperature. They're changing it themselves. It's a very natural, easy progression, and
Exactly.
it's that initial day or two, really, like Pete was talking about earlier.
Sure.
That's where all of your real hot fusel alcohols and off flavors will generally be produced, is when they're first in there with all of that sugar and they just go absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Is
That's
this
when
yours?
it
Is
becomes
this
a good
yours?
term.
The oak age one?
Yeah,
It's really nice, man. I like it.
I'm
It is.
very happy with
Yeah.
this one. This is one that I do once a year with James Harrington. We normally do this, and I'll put bread in it. But normally I'm doing that at 12 or 13%, and
He's like,
I didn't want it that big, so I took this down to about 9.5, and just did the Abbey yeast and then some Hungarian oak with rum.
I'm pretty sure
And
I've
it-
had your
honestly-
other versions of the higher ABV,
Oh,
and they've been good, man.
That's one of my favorite ones that I do.
Yeah,
it just
they're good
takes so
beers.
long when you do the Brett and
I
everything.
haven't had
just
the
want
others,
something easy.
and this is
So,
absolutely delicious.
yeah, I'm pretty happy with this one.
It is really good.
It
Are
totally
you,
doesn't suck.
I'm getting a little coconut in here. Is that from the rum-soaked oak?
I think that might be from the oak more than the rum. That Hungarian oak has a little bit of that vanilla character to it, and that kind of plays with some of the flavors that are in the grain bill. I
That's
think
very nice.
You put the rum in the coconut.
you drink them both up.
And you got a dark strong.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of segues us into talking about the style itself and exactly what are we looking for the flavor out of it, because like other Belgian styles, I think you're talking about a range of things. We've got a ridiculous amount of Belgian beer on the table here, and every one of these is going to taste different from the other, but they're all
Honestly,
going to be kind of in a range.
It's ridiculous, slightly less than ludicrous.
Yeah, well,
so-
maybe read the style guidelines.
I think
I think
the
would
very
be a
first
great.
sentence off of this tells the whole story, really. A dark, complex, very strong Belgian ale with a delicious blend of malt richness, dark fruit flavors, spicy elements, complex, rich, smooth, and dangerous. I think that tells the whole story of this entire category, really.
Notorious.
No.
Dangerous.
Dangerous.
Yeah. No, that is a really good explanation of it, and that's how when you talk about it falling into a range, that's kind of a broad explanation. There's a lot of different types of flavors that can fall into that. Some of these, I think you get a little bit of kind of like a candy sweetness out of,
Raisiny,
and
dark
others
fruit.
you get more like raisin and dark
Werthers.
fruit. Yeah, yeah.
And often enough, you'll find a difference between the level of dryness to a lot of these beers too.
But I think they all still fall on the dry end.
Yeah, but some,
Yeah.
and you'll find a hop
So
character.
here's kind of what I think about this beer. I think it's kind of interesting beer in the fact that it is dry, but at the same time you get some of that candy residual sweetness.
Right. That's why it needs to be dry, because if it's not, that candy residual coupled with actual
Overpowering.
sweetness will just be like a sweet
cloyingly
bomb. Yeah.
sweet.
Right.
Well, and I talk about this a lot of times. When we're doing we're talking about adjuncts and stuff like that in brewing class when I'm teaching brewing classes, and we talk a lot about why do you use adjunct? Well, and I always compare this particular style or in Belgian styles to American or English barley wines. And the reason I do that is because I think you kind of want to contrast the difference between having a big high alcohol beer with an adjunct and then versus not. Now I know that you have a lot more hops and stuff in a barley wine, of course, but I think one of the things that you can kind of get an idea of is when you're drinking a barley wine, I think ultimately, at least for me, especially English barley wines, I go, man, holy crap, these are over the top to me, cloyingly sweet.
Right.
I don't like to drink them.
If you think about the way those are drank, and I listened to Fritz Maytag from Anchor Brewing talk about it at one point, where when he's actually the one responsible for bringing that style back from Europe and over here to America. And when he was over in England researching it, he asked about it, and they said that's an old lady drink. And they would drink it out of a small little glass, like a sherry glass or something like that. And that was a little sipping beer that old ladies drank. And here we're pouring a pint of it and going, man, this is cloying and sweet. Well, yeah, you're not supposed to be quaffing this stuff. And I think it's a really good contrast that you're drawing there between like a barley wine and a quad.
Yeah.
That's the difference. These beers are meant to be, even though they're high alcohol, they're
meant to
very,
drink.
very drinkable.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the point that I was trying to make, Brandon,
most
earlier.
Belgian.
Some people use adjuncts for different reasons, and ultimately, like BMC or Bud Miller Coors are using it because it's a cheap source of alcohol. They can use corn sugar or corn syrup, or they use a cereal cooker to get
With no flavor.
It's
They're
no
using
flavor.
syrup now, yeah.
They're using it for alcohol, right? Well, and I think ultimately, after people drink a lot of craft beer, once they kind of make that jump to craft beer, is they actually think, and they go back and drink the adjunct laden lager, right? Man, say that fast 3 times.
Right.
Adjunct laden lager. But anyway, but once they do that, I think their main complaint is, wow, this tastes like water. And and the reason being is because anytime you add adjuncts to beer, whether it be any kind of sugar, what it does is that it actually adds alcohol, but it doesn't add any extra body, and you've got no residual flavor. From
It's funny too to think about that they're like, man, this beer is 4%. We've got to find a way to get that alcohol, that 4% alcohol in there without flavor. It's so funny to think of it in those terms, where with like English beers and that kind of thing that are 4%, you're like, man, we got to mash a little higher to make sure the flavor gets in here.
Right. Yeah. So I think ultimately that's what you got to kind of look at when you're brewing this particular style, is that you have to look at what sugars that you're using.
Yes.
Okay. And I think it's a very important part because, and I think that's the Belgians use adjuncts the best. And
Yes,
the reason
they do.
I say
I
that
agree.
is because they said, hey, we want to make a 10, 12% alcohol beer, but we don't want it to be cloyingly sweet. We don't want it to be, so sweet and thick that it's hard to drink. So let's add sugar to it, and let's boost up the alcohol without having, all of this extra flavor or cloyingly sweet or thick flavor, right? So you get some of that fermentability. So what is it when you're looking for a sugar? So I think this is important too, is your choice of sugar. More often than not, traditionally, it's beet sugar. but you can use table sugar, and
cane sugar.
We'll talk about how you can make it into
or
candy
Belgian
sugar.
candy,
So
invert.
Well,
invert
a
sugar.
lot of commercial sugar is made with beets anyway. It's
Most of the stuff that we get now is actually cane sugar, and I had a big argument with somebody over this, and then they went to the store and looked it up, and most of it is cane sugar that you get at the store.
CNH, pure cane sugar, that's the one.
But anyhow,
Hashtag bullshit.
This is one of you either want to use like a corn sugar that's a monosaccharide that's easy to ferment.
There's a lot of semaphore going on in the room here. We need some flags and.
Just a bunch of flaggers.
Sorry, I didn't
Colors
mean
of
to interrupt
flags.
you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, but I was just saying that this is something to consider when you've got these high alcohol beers.
Bullshit.
You look at
Bullshit.
you got to look at what sugars you're using, because I don't like to use cane sugar, and here's the reason why. And it's not because I'm trying to sell you corn sugar that we have here. It's just that your yeast is already completely bombed out. It's completely wore out because you're doing these high alcohol beers anyway, and
Keep going.
they're already wore out.
These styles are tough on yeast.
When
They
you
are.
have to you actually have to break. So, like cane sugar is a disaccharide. So, in order for that yeast to consume that extra sugar, it actually has to go in there and break that bond apart. Because cane sugar is a disaccharide, it has two molecules of sugar put together, right? So, in order for that yeast to consume, it's got to exert some energy to break that bond, which it's already wore out anyway. And then you have to do that. So, I think in my opinion, it is actually better for you to actually use something that's easier for the yeast to consume.
And let's face it, corn sugar is not expensive. It's not expensive at all. When you're
As a matter
buying your
of
batch,
fact,
you spend an extra $2 or $3 on a batch of beer.
It depends on how much you buy.
I
guarantee you.
For a 5-gallon batch, you're not going to put more than a couple pounds of sugar in. It's not going to cost you very much. So don't complicate things. You're going to do a beer like this.
Well,
it's going to be an expensive beer. It's going to take time, that kind of thing. Don't save $1 on sugar.
Especially
Go
this
please
beer.
buy some corn sugar.
Please do not
any high gravity beer.
Hey, and here's the thing that's the badass about brewing these particular styles. It might cost you $50 to $80 to brew a good Belgian quad, but I'm going to tell you something. This is where you actually save money brewing beer.
Yes, yeah, that's for sure.
Because I mean, you're going to go out and spend at least $10 to $14 for a good Belgian quad beer. You can
On
brew
a six-pack.
And that's for a bomber.
Yeah.
So
Which is basically 2 beers.
Yeah. So I mean, you think about it. You can brew this style extremely well and extremely cheap. It just takes a little precaution, and I think a lot of times people, as beginners, can actually brew pretty good style. I mean, I don't think this is a really difficult style.
No, it's not.
It's not difficult, but it goes back to one of the things we were talking about when we were doing saisons, where people kind of try and just they think, oh, Belgians are easy. You just throw the yeast in there and you can put it in your garage, and that's not the case.
No,
there is no beer out there where you can just not worry about anything.
Exactly.
You do have to follow some rules, and you do
have
need
to
to do
take care
things
of 'em.
intentionally. But to your point, Stubby, what's great about it, you brew 5 gallons of a quad, and if that sits in your kegerator for 8 months, it'll be fantastic from the
Doesn't
time you
matter.
start until the time you finish.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
and it only gets
It's
better.
going to be
Right.
fantastic.
What did we drink tonight? What
All
was that? The Potter beer was from what year? Was this?
2011.
2011.
May of 2011.
It was a 6-year-old beer, and
and it was the most delicious
it was
beer I've had
fantastic.
so
Yeah,
long.
yeah.
So
Exactly.
well, and that's the beauty of these beers too. And here's a couple of things that I would give you tips on brewing these styles. Okay, so a lot of times it does take some time for these to age properly. So I would suggest don't waste your keg. Don't keg this beer. And here's the reason I say this. Because all right, all of these Belgian beers that we're drinking tonight that are 4 or 5 years old, some of them, the reason that they're able to to have that longer shelf life is, one, they are higher in alcohol. Two, you're not dependent on hops as much. Three, they're all bottle conditioned. And the reason that they're bottle conditioned is because it's amazing. You got a beer that's over here that's 3 or 4 years old. It's not oxidized,
Right.
or not very oxidized. Comparison to, I've had stuff that's from local craft breweries that's 4 or 5 months old that are oxidized. You know,
In rough shape already. Yeah.
yeah. So it's one of those things that you've got to kind of really pay close attention to. So I just think that these beers, they age quicker, faster at room temperature, bottle conditioned.
Well, the good thing too about the bottle conditioning at the room temperature range that you're talking is that you're going to have some option for oxygen scavenging, which is going to help in long term as far as oxidation goes,
Right,
which
and
is the
that's
enemy of
exactly-
all beer pretty much for age. And I think that's what you get here, especially when they're all corked and caged for the most part, because they're going to have a higher carbonation rate already. It's just the style has that. And when you have this and it's been bottle conditioned, you're going to have a much broader point of aging than you would say for any other style. That, I mean, if it's not bottle conditioned, it's not scavenging oxygen. There's not a chance for that kind of thing happening. I mean, we have oxygen absorbing caps and whatnot, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah,
Right,
definitely
so,
not the same thing. And I think that's ultimately, you'll hear me rant on this, and we're gonna get what's the lab manager at RAR.
Nick.
He's doing all kind of studies on oxidation right now. So we're going to get him in here to talk about oxidation, because I think he's really well spoken, and he has a really good head on his shoulders, and talking about, if you guys are not familiar with him, go back and listen at was it yeast handling episode?
Yeah, you sound like
The guys at
At RAR.
Brainiac.
The one with the big fan in the background.
Yes.
the studio flooded.
But I thought that was a
Big
great
ass
episode.
It was a fantastic episode. I really liked
so
it.
we're going to have him back on to talk about oxidation. But
I want to bring a counterpoint to this, because I do agree with what you're saying, that this is a style. If you're gonna bottle a style, this is a style that deserves the time and attention that it takes to bottle something. This is also a style that depends very heavily on carbonation. You've got to have a good carbonation level to this too. And
I agree.
And
100%.
it's not a barley wine.
being a higher alcohol style, those can be harder to carbonate in the bottle. There can be some difficulty to
Okay.
it. So there is some merit to putting in a keg and knowing that you're going to get your carbonation correct. If you bottle condition these and you don't, maybe add some yeast back in.
Okay,
that can handle
and
it,
that's
and that kind
exactly
of
the
thing.
point I'm going to get to. There's absolutely do not try to make this style. This, whether it be a quad, triple, double, just repitch. If you're going to bottle condition, repitch with some bottling yeast that this is made for. And because the bottling yeast is actually, it's actually made for doing these certain things. Like I
Yes.
guarantee you that the stuff that a lot of times, have people say, "Oh, I'm going to take
They get
bottle
the
drag. I'm going
dregs,
to take
yeah.
the dregs." Well, that's a strain made just
for
for
bottling.
bottling.
Right.
And it's almost genetically engineered to have low oxygen. It survive in low oxygen, high alcohol, high acidity.
A toxic environment for
A toxic,
yeast.
a toxic environment for yeast. So I tell you what, man, and that CBC1 stuff is an absolute monster. I've never seen anything like this. And so typically, we'll actually rehydrate it and stick it in the bottom of in the bottom
Bottling
of
bucket?
in the bottom of a bottling bucket. So we were in a big hurry. That you guys tasted that Belgian and that triple and the quad that we made. So we were in a hurry, and I said, "Well, screw it. Let's just take that CBC1 and just pour it directly into the carboy and let it sit there for 15 minutes, right? And then bottle it. Let it rehydrate inside the beer." And I'd never done that before. And I'm not bullshitting you. That stuff foamed up and crawled out of the carboy in 10 or 15 minutes.
Jesus.
But if you look at the package, that one little package can carbonate up to like 50, 60 gallons. I mean, it's like a lot, right? But I've had it carbonate these big high alcohol beers, dude, in 3 or 4 days. I'm not kidding you. It's that aggressive. So, but that's when you're pitching that whole pack, you know. But I mean, it's like it's dumb. I don't know why they package that 11 gram package for homebrewers. I think it's dumb. I mean, they should make it a little smaller package. But so I think that's important key to brewing that particular style. If you are going to do it, look at it this way. This is one thing I look at from a standpoint of, okay, well, this is a higher alcohol beer. If you put it in a keg, it's not going to mature as quickly as it would in a bottle at room temperature, right? So that's something to consider as well. The other thing to consider is that I think if you bottle this particular beer, and I like to bottle this in big format, and the reason I do is because I only bring this out for special occasions,
Right.
You know, and I don't really, you know, if I brew that on and I put it in my keg in my kegerator at home, I might get divorced.
See now, and I always keg. I don't ever bottle. In fact, I've got this wood aged quad in a keg right now. It just lasts me a long time, and
It's kind of a problem.
Well,
isn't
you have a unique situation, whereas most people
You
may
have a
have 2 or
non-drinking
3
problem?
kegs. You know, you have like 10 probably.
I have 5.
It's like,
Yeah.
what's up with that?
Yeah,
So crazy.
Greg wins the keg battle, I think.
I have 10.
Yeah,
Oh,
10 is a
Jesus.
lot. That's an insane amount of kegs.
I like variety.
You have
I
to
used
really
to-
be a homeowner for that one.
I used to have 17 in a 22 cubic
Yeah,
foot one. but-
exactly.
Oh my God!
Yeah, I don't.
It's there to be
3.
filled. So.
Oh shit!
I mean, I know I'm a new guy, but I have 3. With
Yeah,
4
that's what
bottles.
most people
It's a good
had.
start.
Started with 2. I mean,
3 when you're new is good.
I feel so
But
far
no,
behind
I
the
think those are some
times.
keys to this particular style. So we talked about yeast. We talked about oxygenation. We talked about yeast selection. We talked about aging. We talked about bottle conditioning. Let's talk about recipes.
Let me see if I've got.
And
my
here's something
recipe.
too. What's on the table right now that we've been trying? We just passed out the Trappistes Roquefort 6, 8, and 10.
I like
right?
the way you say that.
I don't know.
Roquefort?
Honestly,
Roquefort.
that
I don't
That
know.
is Roquefort.
Roquefort.
Yeah.
Okay.
That 6, I think, is the best out of all.
Well, that's the thing too.
Praying
These
for
are
the
all
people of
dark,
Roquefort
strong
right now.
range. And do what?
Praying for the people of Roquefort right now. That hurricane's a bad.
No, that's it's
that where that-
Corpus and Houston and
Oh,
Brownsville.
Rockport.
Oh,
Never mind.
Rockport.
Rockport. Completely different.
Well, these are all dark strongs, though. I mean, they're listed as such, and you've got basically the range of like about 8%, around about 9, almost 10%, and then a little bit close, pushing up towards 12. It's 11 something, right? These are 3 different beers, and you can definitely tell the difference between each one, but they're very similar.
Yes,
and
sir.
in
Very
flavor
similar,
range.
yeah.
And I think that's something you can find in a Belgian dark strong. And I think when people start to find a difference between like a dark strong and a quad, it's usually when it gets into that range of 11 and above. Because I mean, they'll go up to 14% sometimes,
What I find,
But
that-
you can have a dark strong that's much smaller than that. That's more in like the 7 to 8% range.
Yeah,
And still, it's
yeah.
a great, easy drinking beer. It's strong. It is what it is. But it's not a double.
No,
it's not
you're
the
right.
same thing.
It's
so.
not just an alcohol percentage
Right.
thing. The difference between the double and the quad.
It's a
You're
lot
right.
about flavor, and that's what you're
Right,
saying about
right.
ingredients. Is I think that I love a good dark strong, and they have such great flavor range. They're not the light beer anymore, but they're still an easy to drink.
Well, one
high
of the
flavor
things I'll
beer.
say with these 3 side by side is that the yeast character is totally different, dependent on how strong the alcohol and
Right.
the grain bill flavors are. The what was it? Do we start up with 6?
6,
8, 10. Okay.
Yeah.
The 6 was very peppery.
Right.
I got a lot of pepper out of the yeast phenolics.
I got a lot more of the actual grain flavor, I think, in the 6 than I did
of
other
the
two,
base
but
malt, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
And then as it
You
went
guys
up,
must still be sober because I can't tell the damn difference anymore.
well, no, I'm pushing it. I wouldn't call myself sober. No, I don't think that
Wait,
the
is the
Texas
room
State
spinning or
Trooper
not?
would,
He's
would
slower.
call me
Slower?
sober. Yeah.
I'm slower.
Slower.
So as the flavors from the malt and from the specialty grains become stronger and the alcohol gets higher, I think that the yeast character gets blended into the background a little
Right.
bit more.
Right.
And so that's what I got from these three side by side. I had never tasted them side by side like that. That was
I haven't
That's why I
either
picked
because
them
I
up.
can't afford it.
We got the small bottles
Those,
tonight,
yeah, but shit, those are still like $5-6 a piece, man.
but it was worth trying.
Yeah, for a,
Well-
it's not even a full 12 ounces, man. They screw you on that. 11.2 ounces. Yeah,
But I think the good thing is that like you can tell too when you go across the board, they're all like the same level of dryness.
you can get these across the
know,
border.
across
Which
the
border?
Belgian border.
I thought you said
They're all the same level of dryness. It's just the flavor changes across each one. I think you know what I mean. Like that 6, even though it was a lower ABV, was not overly sweet, and neither was the 8, and neither was a 10. They were all. I think they were all like really good examples. Like here's the same thing in 3 different ranges, and that's something that's a really good concept behind a Belgian dark strong or quad, right? Versus, what do we have on the table? We have like 3 or 4 11, 12% range beers.
Yeah,
let's
bust them out.
You're gonna be slower. And
Like we
slower.
opened the
Honestly-
Delirium Nocturnum. That's a good one. I've always
I didn't
enjoyed
get
that
any
one.
Decent beer.
Where is it? Well, it just got opened a minute ago.
Oh, okay.
What,
That's
what,
the thing
what-
about
we
what is
better
that?
pass
What's the
this in.
size of that one, Brandon?
Small.
11
Small bottle.
11.2, yeah.
Not that kind of size.
Hey, you know
I
what?
would say this
though?
is actually pretty close to the.
8.5.
Roquefort.
You know,
So
the-
let
Hey,
me
man.
talk about a recipe here. The one that I've got here, which I call Jean Claude Van Damme,
I passed it to
Is-
guest
is-
star here.
so it's it's about 77% base malt split between Pilsner and Munich. There you go.
Ooh, yeah.
Got about 4% Cara Munich 2, about 4% Special B, 2% melanoidin, and then about 5.5% of sugar.
There we go.
So it's although it's got a few different specialty malts in there, they're in very low percentages. The majority of the flavor coming from this is going to be the Cara Munich and Special B, I would say, and then the yeast contribution. So it's easy to dry that out when you're talking about 77% base malt, and you're not getting too heavy on all your specialty malts and that kind of thing. And then you've also got
Go for it,
5.5%
bro.
of dextrose in there too.
Well,
so.
I think a lot of times, man, when people get this style, they just pack this shit full of Special B.
Right, and I hate that. That's
and-
my biggest pet peeve about this style in homebrew.
And I think a lot of times what happens when you pack in that much of that big specialty malt is that a lot of times you get that too much of that candy flavor. You don't get that dry, effervescent, that
But
almost
especially Special B goes beyond candy flavor. It's that
raisin.
intense raisin
It
flavor.
lingers, and it
hate.
lingers too.
I can't stand it.
Special
It lingers beyond dryness.
Pinch of salt in that recipe, not
Salt.
Yeah.
like a pinch of salt.
Yeah. You just
Specialty.
want them a small amount.
Exactly.
Less than 1% of your overall grain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't want to be able to pick that flavor out. It needs to be something
Needs to
that
be a
enhances some of the other flavors. That's a really
complementary.
good way to put it. I agree with that.
Well, and that may be something too. We talked about that beer that you and I, or you guys have all tasted, that quad that I made, and I thought this was a really interesting. And the whole reason, the only reason I wanted to try that particular recipe is because I thought it was really interesting because all it had was just dark candy sugar, And the reason I thought that was interesting is I was like, how do you get all those flavors? How do you get all that raisin character? How do you get all that dark fruit character? How do you get all of that from just dark candy sugar? But
It
lo
was
and
there.
behold,
It was there
is
for sure.
all there.
And I would even say that it was there in a much more balanced, measured tone than
Yeah.
these recipes like mine that are you're building it out of grain.
I'm definitely going to be doing it again.
Yeah, I would
sure.
absolutely brew that recipe for sure.
Yeah, and it was simple. It was like, I don't know, 12, 13 pounds of pills and 2 pounds of the D180. That was the grain bill. It was that simple. It was
I
ultra
need to
simple.
make
Which
that
is-
next time.
It's deceptively easy for something like that. It was really about the care and maintenance of the beer after the fact more than it was.
Yeah,
the
I think
ingredients
it's
and all of
more
that
about
stuff.
your yeast.
Right.
Your
You
yeast.
took care of the
maintenance.
yeast. You
Yeah.
chose the right yeast, and then you took
And-
care of the beer after the fact. And then,
and-
like what you said, you bottle condition to get what you wanted out of it.
Right.
Because that really is a great beer. So I know it still exists out there. So
There's maybe 7-8 bottles of it left.
well, bring it out, man.
And you didn't
Put it
bring
in
any
our-
for
forward
the,
to trying
for
it
the
again?
quad?
Put it in
Dude,
our
I
6th anniversary glasses because it would look better
I
than the
completely forgot.
Abbott 12 here.
Ooh, I love that beer. That's a good beer.
Yeah.
That's what you just got poured.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. And
Is
see,
that what-
there's another one too. This again has a lot of flavor, but it's light and easy to drink. That's the main thing about it. I think we got people falling asleep.
No,
at
no,
the
you're
table
right.
here.
The,
No,
the
absolutely not.
drinkability
It's all
is
good,
absolutely the key to this. And I think if you look too at the
Pete, all right?
the IBU balance in this too. The recipe that I was just given with mine is an 11% beer with 20 IBUs in it. And I think that's one of the reasons that you've got to have that dryness to it.
Too damn
is
high.
You don't want bitterness. You don't want any hop character in
Right.
it at all. If you're tasting hops in a quad, you've put too many hops.
Yeah.
The IBU level's got to be real low, and that's one of the reasons you got to dry it out really well.
I'd say the same thing in a triple, really. Really, you need to be tasting the malty flavors.
What happened to
and
Pete? Someone broke Pete.
It's broken.
You said
You went to the
hoppiness.
dark side.
I think the same thing.
Welcome, Pete, back. Well, he had a
Welcome
stroke
back,
at the end
Pete.
of that. Something happened. I don't know.
It's all good, lads.
Something
It's all
happened at
good.
the end of that. I don't know what.
All right. I got news for you, dude. If you need mouth to mouth, you're gonna die.
That's your brother telling you that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Clyde and Dale talking some smack there. What else do we have in the description
Look
as
at
far
the
as
shotgun.
reference on like characteristic? I think there was one about the characteristic overall in that. I don't have it in front of me because Pete stole mine. So
Pete,
Maybe
so,
a
okay, so
lack
the
of
aroma is
maybe a lack of characteristics. And then we're talking about Brandon. Go ahead, sir.
So in the overall impression, it's saying the aroma is
Sean
complex
Connery.
with a rich, sweet, malty presence, significant esters and alcohol, and an optional light to moderate spiciness.
I'm saying that's a bunch of bullshit. But go ahead, sir.
Yeah, we'll just cut Pete out later.
Yeah, the BJCP is just a bunch of crap.
Well, and this is one of the honestly.
and Pete died on air tonight.
And Pete,
Remember, we're
All
live.
eaters, dude.
I'm good.
Pete has had too much.
If I remember correctly,
I'm
a couple
good,
minutes
dudes.
ago, you were asleep.
I'm good, dudes. Go ahead.
Anyway, anyway, no, I think this is a beer that I like to go. If I'm going to a nice restaurant, I like to drink this beer with a nice steak.
Brandon,
I mean,
really?
Right.
This is a I think
Or
this is a-
barbecue.
or barbecue.
Yeah.
There
Or
you go.
barbecue.
With the sweet
Uh,
barbecue,
so,
yes, not a vineyard
Sean,
barbecue.
I think this. I mean, if you don't mind sharing, I mean, what we tasted your quad tonight. I thought it was
Which was
fantastic.
really good, yeah.
You
Yeah,
did
it
a
was
great.
good.
Absolutely
You did a great
amazing.
job at this. Do you mind sharing? Maybe I mean, you can just give us kind of what you're putting in there. You don't have to give us exact numbers
Or your
anything
philosophy,
like that.
basically,
Or,
of brewing.
yeah.
Yeah, so
All your secrets, please.
Oh,
our malt bill is almost 99% pills. There's a little bit of two-row, about 16% of the sugar content comes from the Belgian candy sugar.
Okay.
And then we have 0.5% of Special B.
Okay.
And that's about it.
A pinch.
That's
Yeah,
good.
a pinch
Just a
salt.
pinch of
Yeah,
salt, yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's a good.
Um,
That's a
using
good
like
analogy.
the 180 for the
Yeah.
candy sugar, the extra dark, or what
Do
are
I?
you using, what are you using for candy sugar?
That's a good question. I can't remember exactly. Sorry.
It's
about
probably
that.
just
For
probably
the
That's
just
what
Probably.
happens with Dark Strong Night.
Yeah, exactly.
Where am I? Yeah.
I've had way too many samples this evening, but I can tell you we do use dry yeast. I know Stubby, you talked about your affinity for the liquid yeast for this style. We're using the Mangrove Jack M31.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And we've had really good results with it.
Is that the Belgian ale yeast? Is
It's
that what
their
that's called?
It's a
The
triple
triple yeast.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Ah.
So
Interesting. Okay.
and
Good.
I'm using dry yeast for everything that we do, and
Well, it makes sense in
was
a
looking-
brewery standpoint. I
Yeah.
mean, really, it does, especially a startup. So,
Right.
I mean,
But so far we've done 2 batches with the Mangrove Jack, and it's worked really well for us. So I start off the fermentation profile around 65 degrees. Let that go for a couple of days, solid at 65, and then free rise before bringing it back down. And yeah, I mean, I'm really happy with what we've been able to do. It's I wish I could claim credit for this recipe. This recipe actually came from my brewing partner Doug Nipper, who I brew with all the time.
Yeah, where is he tonight?
I don't know.
He's probably getting laid somewhere.
he lives in West Louisiana, so it's a bit of a hike for him to make it over.
Does he really?
Oh, Plano.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
Plano, West Louisiana, whatever.
Same thing.
Plano East, actually. So
Yeah, then you're right. Yeah.
Down
But,
in that good pudding. Right on.
Yellow pudding.
but we also do a double decoction on this particular recipe, which is actually a lot of fun compared to a lot of things that we do, and I think it definitely you can taste a difference in the quality of the beer with that decoction mash as opposed to doing a step mash or just a simple infusion mash.
So you're planning on doing that decoction on a commercial level also?
I think that's going to be challenging. I think we're going to try to do a step mash instead.
Okay.
It's interesting that you bring that up because we've decided that this beer is actually going to be the first beer that we brew on the big system when it comes in.
I was wondering because you didn't mention it earlier. It's,
That's ambitious.
Well, because usually to do a decoction on a commercial system, you have to have different types of pumps.
Right.
on
You
it,
actually
'cause
have
you've gotta-
Right.
you actually
pump
have
the
to
mash.
have a decoction system.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do a test batch on the pilot system, doing a step mash instead of a double decoction to see how that turns out. But the goal is to the very first batch that we brew on the big system once we get up and running is going to be this beer, and we're going to hand bottle the entire 30 barrels, put it away for a year.
Nice. Very nice.
And our plan is to serve that in a bottle conditioned as our first anniversary beer a year later.
Oh, that's
Awesome.
Now-
Hell yeah.
I have
Hell
to
yeah.
ask, having talked to other smaller brewers and local brewers, will you be asking for volunteers for bottling that?
Of course, yes.
Okay.
What? Oh.
Oops.
We FaceTime. podcast.
My wife doesn't believe I'm still here, so I just wanted to show her that we're still talking.
We're here.
Yeah, we're
know
still
what?
here. If she
What's
followed you on
up?
Facebook or all of us on Facebook,
We're
she'd
gonna give
know.
you a pass on that one.
Yeah.
When the wife doesn't believe you,
Love
you
you.
just
Hope you have
just
your
Still
shirt
with the
on.
You
assholes.
have at least 3
I'm still in the room
witnesses.
with a bunch of assholes, and it smells bad. We're good.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it smells bad.
But we
It
have
smells
2
delicious in
bottles
here.
of quad with corks still in them.
Wait, did you actually pour any
Did
of
you
the?
say? What did you just say?
They have corks still in them.
There is okay.
She might have to pick you up.
I did just open the Brother
Ooh.
Thelonious, which is
Yeah.
a good
Oh,
North Coast
man, that's-
example.
that's-
That's an American version. I think we're now getting down to the American versions,
Yeah.
and we've had all the Belgians.
I'm going to
We
keep
have
this
that
over
one.
here and make sweet, sweet love to it.
And that's what everybody's already been trying to do all night. That's kind of disturbing. You might want to wipe that thing down, actually. But we have that. We have the 6th glass from Boulevard, and then we have
Dude,
one
what
more.
the fuck?
Oh, really? Really? We get it.
What the fuck?
Just when I thought I
Oh,
was
dude.
used to the noises coming out of him, I was like, "Where is that coming from?"
We get Pete back for the first
Good
time
times,
on live,
bitches.
and we have
And the
no
early
video of
'90s
him.
Bud Light commercial comes back.
Well, you really never know what you're going to get into. You're in it.
All right. Well, this is
Keep-
quickly
well,
getting out
you're,
of hand.
you're not trying these beers.
Quickly.
Oh,
No, you
we
know,
should-
but I think this is one of the styles
Can I
that,
show
that
these beers because they're all really awesome.
Enough, Pete. Really.
Oh my goodness!
well, and I think to me some of the this particular style of beer, if you're really into beer, I think to me this is one of the holy grails. If you can achieve this is a fantastic beer. if you can make it. And the same thing with Imperial Stout. I think that's another one that's, one of the holy grails. That if you can achieve that, if you can make a great Imperial Stout, it's one of the best beers out there.
But this is going to be a much more drinkable beer.
Yeah.
The thing that I get excited about brewing this beer is that we talk about craft beer all the time, right? And there are
We
a lot of beers that we
certainly do.
brew that become habitual,
Right.
right? I mean, half the beers that I
Habitual
brew,
offenders.
once
Yes,
I've done them
sir.
2 or 3 times, I can do them in my
Certainly
sleep, right? I don't have
so
to
much
think
we
about
have
them.
Experience.
Shut the fuck up, Peter.
Guests are speaking.
But this
Let him talk.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
the quad is a style that requires attention, right? You have to work to get this to turn out right. It's not just throw it in the mash tun and
I agree,
and
100%.
sparge it out and boil it and hop it and throw it in the fermenter. This is a beer that you have to really pay attention to the entire process. And every time we plan this brew, I get stressed out 2 weeks in advance, just thinking through the steps to
Right.
make sure that we get everything right. I've got to plan my whole schedule around this beer because it's not a beer that I can just throw in the fermenter and forget about.
No, you
No,
can really
yeah.
screw this beer up at every stage of the process. Really.
Yeah,
You can.
and it does. And Brandon, you hit on a thing exactly earlier, and I think this is one style that I don't brew this beer unless I'm prepared, and
Right.
I don't go in and go, hey, what are we going to brew today?
Let's do a dark strong.
Yeah, let's do a quad or a dark strong. And no,
It's like
I
saying,
just
let's
don't
do a
that.
barley wine.
You got to
real
go to
quick.
the gym for a week before you brew this beer.
Well, I'm just saying
That is
that.
such bullshit.
No, really.
push-ups.
You
I mean,
just-
I've just got to be prepared.
one is enough.
I mean, really, I've got to be prepared for this.
Use the
I mean, just the
car.
grain bill alone, I got to call the banker
Use
and
the
get a
car.
bridge loan
Yeah,
to
no
pay for the
kidding.
grain
Yeah, exactly.
bill.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things. It's kind of like, I have to say, hey, I want this is the yeast I'm going to use. This is I got to brew. I got to build a starter. I've got to be there to be able to do the oxygenation before and after. I've got to be able to prepare this properly. I got to be able to.
You got to be around to manage the fermentation too.
yeah,
Like for
yeah,
me, I
so-
go out of
Right.
town. If I'm gonna go out of town, I don't brew this beer.
You have to
Right.
be cautious with
Yes,
this like a
you do.
lager. More or
Yeah,
less.
I think
you have to
in a lot of ways, yeah, you've got to manage
be
that.
gentle right there on top of it.
One of
you
the
know.
things that we didn't hit on, and some people believe in this philosophy, and you guys, if you want to go back and listen to, man, it was one of our early episodes that we had Grant Wood on,
Right.
and he's a really knowledgeable on
high gravity.
high gravity
Yeah.
brewing, and he was instrumental in implementing the utopias for Sam Adams.
triple Bach and all the rest. Yeah.
Well, don't
Well,
I wouldn't
He wouldn't
I
know
wouldn't
that. Yeah, but
I wouldn't
Absolutely.
I wouldn't I wouldn't
admit to
that.
that.
Yeah. But no, he was really instrumental in excuse me in really developing that program. So one of the things that he was really talked about was with the how they prepared the yeast and multiple yeast strains, and they oxygenated nonstop for 2 weeks, and then they used sherry strains and all of this different stuff. So
Right.
it was all of that stuff is all yeast management in order to do those sort of things. So, but I think it's pretty. Go back and listen to that episode, because if you want to
Yeah.
learn about really high gravity brewing, maybe we should have him out again, even though he's part of the enemy.
No, he's part of the evil empire. I mean, we
I
should
don't know what
definitely
he would
have
to
his
say about that, but
his wallet buy us beer, but no, I say that kind of tongue in cheek. He's
yeah, he's a good guy. I
Yeah,
like
he's
him
a good
lot.
guy.
Yeah.
Or
I like Grant. Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, I mean, he knows what he knows, and it's the same thing though. It's across the board. There's a lot of care and maintenance that goes into a high gravity brew, and it's one of those things where, if anything, always consider what you're putting into it. I mean, because you're spending a lot of money on your ingredients most of the time. The good thing about the Belgians and whatnot, and like versus say a barley wine, is you're spending a little less money overall on hops. but you're still spending more money on yeast if you're not taking care of that, because I mean that's going to add up overall. Or the simple sugars, things like that. Just make sure you take care of it, and then in the end of it, put it in a good heavier glass bottle, Belgian bottles, not a standard bottle, more or not. And then if you can, cork and cage it, do bottle conditioning. If not, put it in a keg, keep it in the keg, and then if you're going to do anything when it goes into a bottle after the keg, just make sure that bottle can handle it for the time it needs to handle it.
The other thing, and I go back to
can
this
pop,
a lot on a lot of different styles and methods that we talk about. I think when you're sitting down to plan out this beer, whether it's the recipe development or the brew day or the fermentation or whatever, go buy one that you really like. Go buy a St. Bernardus or something like that. Sit down and drink it and really get a feel for the key components of the beer and what it is you're trying to accomplish. And I think that's true with most styles, but anything that's you're getting to the higher alcohol on this, and it's a little bit more of a difficult style to get exactly right. Sit down and drink it and really, really pick apart exactly what it is you're drinking and how you're going to accomplish those things about it. Yeah. And don't just go into it haphazard.
I agree.
Because Belgian beers, I think, have that reputation for just, just throw some yeast in it, put it in your garage.
It is a total art form to them.
Don't do that.
And if I could just give a little advice from the homebrew perspective, this is a beer style that requires a bigger grain bill and sometimes a bigger yeast bill than you're used to, right?
Yeah.
This is going to be one of the most expensive beers that you brew. So before you brew it the first time, do a minor league batch. And what I mean by that is
build up.
If you've got the capacity to do 30 gallons, do a 5-gallon batch and get your process down before you go waste a bunch of money on your ingredients. Because I'll tell you, I had a really bad experience the first time I tried to brew ours. We do a double decoction. My old pilot system was a rim system. The very first time we brewed it, I started the rims just like normal after we doughed in, and started pulling mash out for the decoction. And we got through the second decoction, and I had a floury mess on my hands.
Really?
Yeah, because the rims was running the entire time, and I was disturbing the grain bed through that process, and we made them. I literally threw the entire thing out before we had the boil kettle 25% full because I just had a milky mess in my boil kettle. Mm-hmm. So that was an expensive mistake because that was a full grain bill batch that we tried to do that with because I didn't have my process down, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't know how my system was going to react to what I was trying to do. But I learned a very expensive lesson, and the next time we did it, it worked out perfectly. But go through the paces with your system.
That's a good point. You do really need to know your system for something like this because you're going to max it out on grain bill.
Exactly.
You're maxing it out to the max.
Yeah, and that introduces it introduces things that you don't run across otherwise.
Yeah.
Well,
and this will be the biggest mash that your mash tun ever encounters,
pushing it.
right?
Right.
And you've got to make sure that
this is the marathon.
You've got the steps down to make it successful, or you're going to end up dumping a bunch of stuff down the drain.
If you screw up the mash in this, you screw up the beer, period.
Yeah,
and
that's
that's
exactly
like
what happened to us.
a 5K.
You need to make sure that you
this
have
is the marathon.
Smaller beers down pat perfectly before you try and do this. You need to try and do your doubles perfectly, and then you need to try and do your doubles perfectly before you try and do your
Get your doubles
triples.
and your doubles.
But even
perfect.
still,
Quads
yeah.
perfectly.
Well, I would say this: you
Different
guys,
beers, different beers, though.
The last triple or the last quad I brewed was on the Grandfather, and I never packed this thing. Supposedly, you can get 20 pounds in this thing, and that's a tall order. Be real honest with you, that's a tall order.
It is.
And the one thing that I would say is that don't be afraid if your capacity is not that big, but you're trying to get that grain bill. Don't be afraid to have 3 pounds of DME on.
Yep, I agree completely.
And if you don't hit your gravity, have 3 pounds of DME on
For
hand.
any high gravity brewing.
Well, yeah, you know,
always
that's
have some DME.
That's
on
a very
it. I
good
mean,
point. That when you max out your system like that, there's a good chance your efficiency
gravity
is going to
be
suffer.
shit, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
that's-
and you might lose some points, and it is good to just have some on hand.
DME
to
and a
hit that.
refractometer.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Find out
yeah.
what you're starting with, and then make sure that you can build it up with some extra sugar. That's real easy on the
Yeah.
backside.
Well,
of it. So
and
before
that,
you go
that
and-
quad that you guys tasted, I put 3 pounds of DME in it. And,
Yeah.
you know, so what?
I've done that
You
several
know,
times. Yeah.
I had to boost my alcohol, and the thing is, after the fact, I didn't calculate it properly, and I ended up with 1.12, and I got it down to it was like 1090 or 10. It was below whatever 1010 or 10. I mean, it was really low. Anyway, I think it ended up being like 16% alcohol or something dumb like that. I have to
Holy
figure it
shit.
out. Yeah. But it tastes good though. So whatever. And you drink 2 bottles of it and you're face down. But
done.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, at any rate, I think we may have.
But I want to hit two couple
Overextend our
things.
stay.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you, Sean, for coming
Yes,
out tonight.
thank you
sir.
very
Sean,
much,
really.
Thanks for
and
having
your
me.
beer. Thanks for
Yeah,
bringing
thanks
it,
for
man.
bringing
Absolutely.
it out.
And hauling us over here too.
Make sure do some shout outs. So how can they follow you on social media?
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The Facebook page is Cowtown Brew Co. Instagram is at Cowtown Brew Co. Oh no,
There
that's Twitter at Cowtown Brew Co. I don't remember exactly what the Instagram
That's all right.
is.
Just look
but
up Cowtown
yeah,
Brewing
Cowtown
on
Brew
all these.
Co. It's,
Look at
that's the
Cowtown
general
Brewing.
thing. So
Yeah,
Oh, actually, you should also say what is it? What
you guys are
sorry,
still
I
looking
lost
for
the name
investors
for,
too, though, right?
we are
Mansfield.
yes.
What's the barbecue place in Mansfield?
Big D
Right now.
Barbecue.
Big D.
Big D.
And I've had their
From what I've heard, the
barbecue,
barbecue's
it's
great. So
fantastic,
go out
man.
there
So,
and check
yeah.
it out. I mean, if you're around our area or you're coming through, so
We may have to try it tomorrow.
Yeah, you can bring it to us, Chris. You going out there and picking us some up?
Yeah, there you go.
We
Chris
might.
Chris is feeding everybody tomorrow.
Do I get to take your credit card with me?
Well, the funny
Yeah,
thing
as
is
long
we
as
have a lot
you-
of people coming from the Mansfield area in our
The
shop
Mansfield?
and club and whatnot. Mansfield, sorry.
Okay.
The
Mansfield.
It is plural. Mansfield.
Basically, what I'm thinking is that like we have people out there that need to be bringing us some barbecue, man. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but in closing, I kind of want to go over a couple of things. Make sure to if you guys are in Europe and you want to hook up, hang out in Germany or Belgium, I'm gonna be out there in 2
Do
weeks.
some freaky shit.
Well, I don't know about freaky
Well,
shit, but
with
we'll drink some
leather
beers.
and rubber,
Or good Texas shit.
latex.
Maybe some.
Stubby's like, you don't understand what freaky shit means in Europe. Yeah.
I don't want to do that stuff.
Yeah.
It's like hostile sex.
No, but either that
Especially
or
the Germans.
yeah, if you want to hang out, or whatever,
Germans like
hit me up. Or if you have
Goddamn.
suggestions of places that I should go,
Long.
if you have places that suggestions of places that you think I should go,
That are safe.
Thing all
yeah,
around.
hit me up at.
Safe for the stubbles.
Also, make sure to follow me at Brendan Stubblefield on Facebook, and
At
I'm going
Brew with
to
Stubby.
broadcast live when I'm out there.
I was
So
just
you
going to
can-
ask you that.
yeah,
You are going to broadcast
yeah.
that. That's awesome.
And you
It's gonna
guys
be
can
great.
you guys can ask me questions. I'm going to show you all the fun stuff. I'm actually going to be at Oktoberfest for the actual tapping of the keg.
Oh
We got tables, so I'll try to broadcast
totally
that.
forgot
I
live.
thought you were
that's
going next month.
happening.
What the hell?
2 weeks from now.
Yeah,
2
isn't
weeks.
that September?
Oktoberfest is in September.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oktoberfest is in September?
Yes.
What does that mean? I don't understand.
Very, very strange.
Explain that to us.
I can't explain it.
It's
Don't.
never mind.
So weird.
Explain it in German?
He's going to be online with videos of whatever he does with Fritz, and
Yeah,
gonna be interesting,
No, no Shiza videos.
All the
No Shiza
all
porn?
the harnesses and
I don't even know why you're going there.
etc.
Much leather.
All right, well, I was
vomitoriums.
going to read these last
Way to hear
bullet
it to
points, but I
pump
feel
you
like
up.
we just...
Greg,
Yeah,
wants
everybody
to-
just turned it off, right?
Go ahead, B. Randon.
Go for it.
No, I don't think so.
Next, no, okay.
All right,
so please
well-
be sure to check us out on our Patreon account at patreon.com/comeandbrewradio to help support the show. We have $2, $5, $10, and $20 options because every little bit counts on Pete's
Hell
never
yeah,
invited
because-
on the show again.
Because the
Plus-
last 2 episodes have been like $200 worth of beer. I'm just saying.
He's
Yes.
got a lot of Pete backup
Well,
over here.
Plus, we want to reward
Pete's the
you
patient.
while you keep the show going.
That's a lot
God
of
damn it,
participation
Pete.
that you're hearing.
So this is one of those things where like Pete hasn't been on a show in a long time, so it builds up. And
Yes,
then,
definitely.
So we're going to
builds up.
apologize.
you know,
Damn it, Pete.
thanks again for listening to
Bingo.
Come at Brew It Radio. Be sure to share with your friends on social media, not this episode. Give us some ratings on iTunes and Stitcher. And send any ideas or comments to info@texasbrewinginc.com. Also, you can always check in on the brew days of the guys at their brew focused Facebook pages at Brew with Stubby, Brew with Brando, Brew with Mikey B, Brew with Pete, Brew with Chris, or Brew with Greg.
Come and
Come
brew
and do
it.
it.
What, Pete?
Wow.
Say it.
What the hell was that?
That's too much beer for Pete right there. Oh my god.
I know it happens, doesn't it? It adds up.
I'm really not sure what happened just
Pete?
now.
Can you stand up?
Should Pete
Well-
stand up really with all of us in the same room?
Well, hell yeah.